I will be taking a bit of a different approach. I have no maps. My time period is 20 years, 95 to 2014. I do trend analysis. So I do not come at it from a deeply historical point of view. And I'll be taking us to Asia, where we have just been with Tony and Jane, but also be introducing some of the new developments and trends in the Gulf and in Africa as well. So there are 5 kind of key messages or issues that I'm going to try to address in our presentation. And the first one is that education hubs are the 3rd generation of cross-border education. First of all, I don't know how many of you use the term cross-border education. So let me clarify this. This can be academic mobility, it can be transnational education, it can be offshore education. Perhaps it would be easier for us to use international mobility, but for those of us in international higher education, there are some differences, and I do believe that border has some importance in this. The second message is that I'd like to discuss with you. I mean, I really would like this to be, this is a work in progress. And so I am proposing the idea of 3 different kinds of education hubs: a student hub, a talent hub, and a knowledge hub. But this is a student education hub, a knowledge education hub, and a talent education hub. The World Bank uses the concept of knowledge hub in a very different way. The third one is I'd like to explore with you some of the rationales. What is driving countries to try to prepare themselves, position themselves as education hubs? And one of the areas that we haven't talked about as much is all about the different policy sectors that are involved. We've talked always a lot about different disciplines, but when we talk about policy sectors, whether it be immigration or trade or science and technology or education or industry or labor. So I'd like to introduce a little bit of a discussion about some of the policy sectors and major actors that are involved in hubs. I'm not sure we'll have time, but I'm really struggling right now in terms of how to do some differentiation about these hubs. I've considered the idea of using indicators. I have both an interest, but perhaps a bit of a mistrust of some of the indicators and the data. I talk about the human development indicators, the Economic Forum Competitiveness Report indicators, etc. And finally, I really would be interested to have a discussion about whether, in fact, these education hubs are nothing more than a fad, nothing more than a branding exercise, or really, in fact, are they an innovation? And so I think that's something that this whole sustainability of them is an area of interest. So what do we mean by 1st and 2nd and 3rd generation academic mobility or cross-border? We have been primarily talking about the way I would conceptualize it as people mobility. We've emphasized students and scholars and experts, but also leaders. But it was fascinating to start with the mobility of the Rayner's work on the database for 1250 to 1450. Man, did that give me a historical perspective I hadn't had before. But it's interesting. In the 1960s, can you guess what the student mobility might be around the world? 1960s, 55 years ago. How much? 260,000 students. What was it in 2010, 2011? 4.1 million. What are the forecasters saying? 7.2 million by year 2025. What they're saying is that a lot of that mobility is going to be much more regional based, and therefore we may be talking about international mobility and intra-regional mobility more than we have before. But the demand for international higher education is increasing, both for the program, for the exposure, for scholars, but also for qualifications. And so actually the 7.28 million by 2025 is not really going to represent the kind of education mobility we are going to have. And that takes us into the second generation. And the second generation is when the programs, the academic programs are moving across countries. And secondly, the providers. And by this, I'm going to speak primarily today about universities and higher education institutions, but a provider also can be a private training company, a corporate university, an NGO. I was never more surprised when I was doing work in Russia to find the Indian Association of Engineers offering a degree program in Moscow. So, what do we mean by program mobility? This is really a complex area, but it really is, the nub of it is that a student in their home country, primarily, but not always, is receiving, is studying a foreign program and usually receiving the qualification of the provider that's located in a different country. As an example, in about 2008, Malaysia had 3,000 of these programs. So if we're talking about student mobility, just take the idea of 3,000 programs multiplied on an annual basis in terms of how many students are studying it, and then look at it in the last 25 years, and you will see that the mobility of the academic program through program mobility is a stronger and perhaps more influential way of mobility than actually the student moving. And that's why this number of 7.25 students moving is going to be surpassed by these other modes. So I won't go into them about joint and double degree programs and franchise programs and twinning programs or virtual programs, but that certainly is a growing area. The second part is provider mobility, and this is when we're talking about a branch campus, and in this case I'm talking about international branch campuses. And this really is a satellite operation of a university in country A that has its operation, its academic programs, a bricks and mortar presence in country B. And in 2004, how many were there around the world? 25. By 2000, that were recorded. Data collection is an important point. However, 10 years later, there were 200 with 50 more being planned. So a branch campus is of an existing institution, okay? The new phenomena which I'm now studying is the creation of a brand new institution, standalone, independent, by partners in different countries. So the Singapore University of Technology and Design is a perfect example. It's been MIT and the Singapore University and Zhejiang University in China collectively have developed this university. It is independent, it is licensed, it is located in Singapore. interesting that they took MIT for some of the of course, the scientific, the content, but chose Zhejiang because they wanted to have the Asian culture, the Asian influence, Asian design built into this university. They did not want it to be seen as an Americanized university. There are numerous independent, brand new universities in China right now. Part of that is because of China regulations. The UK is very active in that. So that's what I mean by provider mobility. By a university, we're only going to talk today about universities, but I do say there are a lot of other providers that are involved in this kind of program and provider mobility. The third one, which is our focus, education hubs. And what I'd like to describe an education hub is as a whole greater than the sum of the parts. This is where the students, yes, are moving. The programs are moving. The research centers are coming together. The knowledge industries. So this is the concept that it is a cumulative from people mobility and program and provider mobility, but includes new actors, which will be the research centers and the knowledge industries. Because a lot of the discussion that we've had today, we have around academic mobility, is more in the teaching aspect than in the research aspect. So this is what's an important part of the education hub. So, it is still an evolving concept and reality. In fact, it's a very popular trend. When I first started this research in 2008, because I do trend analysis, I was doing some research on the web, Hong Kong as a hub. Guess what I found? Hong Kong wanted to be 16 different kinds of hubs. Fashion, transportation, finance, communication, wine. There are a lot of countries who are trying to position themselves as a hub. So it is a trend, and hence my concern about whether it's a fad, a brand, or in fact, a sustainable innovation. But an education hub is also being used, other words are being used, education cities, regional hubs, learning clusters, knowledge village, centers of excellence. There are a whole number of terms being used. And I ask the question, again, is it a fan brand or an innovation? Why? Because this is a self-acclaimed label. This is a label that a country has adopted itself, or a zone, or a city. There is no body around the world that says you are an education hub or you're not an education hub. And therefore, my interest in how do we deal with what I consider to be a lot of wannabe hubs. Hubs, for instance, Mongolia. Is really trying to exert itself in the international scene. It has a new German binational university. Because it has one binational university, it would like to claim itself as a hub. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has a huge student recruitment plan to bring in students from the region. They want to call themselves a hub. So we have to be careful about this branding orientation to what a hub is. So there are, in the research that we have done to date, and I really apologize, I did not bring a copy of the book or any of the papers, but there is a book out this year, 2014, Springer. It's called International Education Hubs, by myself, and you can find that on the line. I'm sorry I didn't bring it with me. But you can look at a country-level hub. And so when we look at a country-level hub, we get away from the concept that this is a specific place, that a hub is a physical location. It can be a physical location, but it's certainly not limited to a physical location. The 6 countries that we included in our study, and which I will be talking about today, are these 6. 2 from the Middle East, 3 from Southeast Asia, and 1 from Africa. But there are also zone-level hubs. And these often are free trade zones. So Incheon from Korea, Dubai, Iskandar from Malaysia. Then, of course, there are city levels. And we have referred often in this time together about Boston or London, but there are some cities, Bangalore, Adelaide, who are now deliberately planning a strategy to be perceived, to be positioned, to act as an education hub. So, what is a working definition of hub? I really put the emphasis on working. Okay, it's in progress, but it is a planned effort. It is not a spontaneous effort like Sri Lanka saying, I want more students, or Mongolia saying, okay, we've got one binational university. It is not an ad hoc initiative, nor is it a branding label. And one of the things that we did in our research is that we went to all of the planning documents for each of these 6 countries and found out where Education Hub appeared in their national plan 2020, 25, 2030, where they had it embedded into policy level plans. And so it is a strategic planned approach. And we're looking at a critical mass. It's not a single institution. Saudi Arabia says we now have the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. Because this is the newest multi-million-dollar, very interesting initiative, we are a hub. It's not an individual initiative or institution. This is critical, that there are local actors and international actors working together. This is a really important part. It is just not having international presence in a country. It is the connection between local and international. And by this, I mean students, higher education institutions, research centers, knowledge industry, a variety of actors. Again, back to this concept of strategic and back to the concept of interconnected. And therefore, we are looking at hubs in a networking sense, not in terms of a co-location sense, but more of a networking space. This, of course, is the strategically engaged and connected, I would say, is the weakest and most vulnerable and most important part of a hub. And then finally, we're looking at the whole area of providing cross-border education or training or knowledge production or the application of knowledge into innovation. So that gives you a bit of a sense of how we were trying to look at important parameters of a hub. And if we put them together, we really look at the students and the providers, the research industries, and the knowledge industries working together. Often we've only focused on the student mobility or the research. So this shows the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, but I will say that all these pieces are not working together quite as well as this picture shows. That is a challenge. So I just thought I would try to take a few minutes to review the 6 countries that I've talked about, just to give you a sense of how they look, why they want to be a hub, what are they doing, just to give some flesh to this concept of an education hub. So let's start with Qatar, which actually started their development in 1995. That's why I'm saying this is a contemporary analysis of 20 years. The Qatar is a very small country, 1.2 million people. They have one national university. Now they have a national college as well. But they have 10 international branch campuses. 5 of them come from the United States, very prestigious. One of them comes from England, UCL, one from Paris, INSEAD. And what they decided is they would cherry pick. They would cherry pick the best program, if they needed to have journalists, because they now have Al Jazeera, they were very strategic. We need journalists. Where's the best journalist training program? Northwestern, thank you very much. They have a brand new museum of Islamic art. Amazing. We need to have curators. We need to have archaeologists. Where's the best program for that? UCL. We are really focusing on medical research. Where do we go for that? Cornell. We want something in business. Where should we go? So it is directly related to their priorities and their needs. And I think that's really important. It is not just an ad hoc go for whoever wants to come to Qatar. Now, they have developed Education City, and next, which houses these 10 institutions. It's an amazing place. Next to it, they have Science and Technology Park. Next to that, they have the new Medical Research Center. This is $1 billion effort, more than $1 billion, and it will keep going. Outside of this room, I might not say it, but essentially, they are buying expertise. They are buying experts to do the research, to do the training. But I believe they are doing it so they develop their own capacity, their own population to be able to do it themselves in the future. Unlike other countries that do not have a capacity building component in it. They have invested in research that has been in research funds, which is interesting. Of course, they use the international branch campuses located in Qatar. But what's even more interesting is that there are grants provided to the home university. And so they are accessing home university research capacity and developing networks among these different institutions. It is a private initiative. It is the government of Qatar that funds it, but all of it is done under the Qatar Foundation, under the leadership of Sheikh Moza. Stay tuned with Qatar. They have just developed their own national graduate university. And guess what? They are only wanting to offer their degrees, but they've joined in with UCL to offer a double degree program, 2 different qualifications for the same program. So we'll see how that moves on. Singapore, fascinating. They started off as what they called the Global Schoolhouse Project in 1998. And what were their first activities? They were recruiting students, no question. But more importantly, they were recruiting branch campuses. Now they're in their 3rd phase, and they are co-developing brand new institutions in collaboration with very elite partners. As Tony said, you cannot get any kind of data. I can't get data on their policy documents, on how much they've spent. The authors of Singapore said the government is the biggest venture capitalist we have in terms of investing in Singapore as a knowledge research hub. They have 18 international branch campuses. The United Arab Emirates, another completely different, whoa, time goes fast. This is a completely different scenario. And in the United Arab Emirates, you know that it's made up of 7 emirates, 7 provinces, okay? So Dubai has set up 2 free economic trade zones. At one time I was calling them economic free zones, and I thought, or excuse me, education free zones. I thought I better not call them education free zones. That isn't appropriate. They have, look at this, 37 different international branch campuses in the United Arab Emirates. Where do you think they come from? The answer that I get most often is of course Australia. Guess what? Australia has 2 only. That might have been your first. The UK has 5. The US has 5. Who has the most? India. Who else? Lebanon, Iran. So we need to beginning to think about academic mobility in a very non-centric to Europe perspective in looking at what is happening. So just imagine this. Imagine an English university, okay? An English university has a branch campus in the United Arab Emirates, all right? The United Arab Emirates, cultural context, political context, social context, educational regulatory concept, fine. Keep that aside. Then you have a branch campus of a university from the UK who brings in their approach and assumptions and philosophies about how to teach, how to run a university, how to do accreditation, how to do qualifications. Then you have students from all over the world in this university. They are bringing experiences, cultures, assumptions, practices. And then you have the faculty. The faculty, yes, there are fly-in faculty from the British university, but they really hire from the expatriate population primarily. So here we have an international classroom. Here we have an international education setting or a research setting where we have a multicultural dimension of A, among students, B, among faculty, C, among what is the program. And Jane, you made such good points this morning, and I'm going to give you one example. This particular university, which shall be named nameless, is offering business programs in Dubai, graduate level. The students really want to have some training, some education on Islamic banking. Guess what? The university cannot provide it. They cannot make their curriculum relevant because Islamic banking is not offered at the home institution. And because it's a branch campus and it has to be guided by the home campus curriculum, the home campus accreditation. So this whole question of relevance is really an important. Anyway, I have to keep on going. So that's just Dubai, okay? So Dubai, as one emirate, has 25 branch campuses. Then you go to Ras Al Khaimah, where I was last year. And I was at a emirate university, okay? Emirate level university, private, not federal, that was called the American University of Ras Al Khaimah. It had no connection with an American university. It had, so I think what we have to begin to explore is this multicultural, multilingual, aspects of what these education hubs are bringing to us, both in advantage but also in concern. We moved to we moved to Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi has no education-free zones. It is not a commercial adventure. The Sheikh of Abu Dhabi has invited the Sorbonne. And when I visited Abu Dhabi about 10 years ago, and I heard about the Sheikh suggesting that there would be the new Sorbonne University, no French-speaking people or students to speak of. It was a star architectural monument, as in reproducing. And I wrote an article on the plane going home, and I never published it. It was tongue-in-cheek. And it said, universities as collectibles. Now the sheikhs, the emirs, those who can afford it are collecting universities. Until 2 days ago, when I got the history that said the emperors were originally establishing universities for power and prestige. And history either continues or repeats itself. So anyway, Abu Dhabi. So it's very hard to characterize Qatar. Moving on to Malaysia, this is an extremely interesting case study. When we did the data gathering in 2011, there were 7 international branch campuses, and now they have put out tenders for 7 more. They have more than 3,000 of these programs moving, or twinning programs. And it has become a major student destination. Interestingly enough, the number one, now Tony, you'll have to help me with this. I think the number one is Iranian students in Malaysia, and number 2 is China. Is that correct? Yeah. Anyway, Malaysia is a very interesting country because the government has definitely got it in their 2020, their 2040 plan. They have a very well-developed strategy to develop an education hub. They do have immigration and science and technology and industry. They have a very coordinated approach to developing an education hub. Botswana in 2008, I have to tell you, did the most interesting consultative process to develop very deliberately themselves as an education hub. And their concept was, we have to build, educate, supply trained labor for this country. We can no longer be only dependent on diamonds. So we have to have trained labor to be able to serve other industrial sectors. And so it really tried to present itself as what you will eventually see, a talent hub trying to prepare both local and regional students and research to support their diversification of their economy. And then Hong Kong. Hong Kong has got 4 IBCs at this point. It's got more than 1,000 of these programs, these twinning programs, these collaborative programs, and it has a huge international recruitment plan, of which 90% come from China. So if you add up one point that I want to make, yes, student mobility and scholarly mobility is extremely important. But if you add up the number of branch campuses that are housed in these 6 hubs, you will find that there are 80 of the 200. And this, I think, is something that is looking at the importance of this second generation of mobility. Ooh, I'm really late. Okay, let's move on to what is driving this race for hubs. When we look at what's driving the race, I think we have to do a 360-degree perspective. So we have to look at it from the host country, the host sponsor, and the major actors. But we also have to look at it from the sending country, the foreign higher education institutions, the foreign companies, the foreign research and development centers who are coming in. And of course, we have to look at it from the students and the employers. So we did this kind of 360 analysis on each of these country hubs. What I'm going to talk about very briefly now is only why the host country is interested in developing an education hub. And I will say that I'm using very deliberately what I hope is neutral language. I'm talking about host country and sending country. And often when we put it into the paradigm of a colonization or decolonization, we have another reality that is put onto it that is very important to recognize, but also it's important to take a little bit of a more neutral approach to it. And so you'll see the word host or receiving country. First of all, number one rationale is to internationalize and modernize the domestic higher education sector. They want to improve their own universities. They want to increase access for students to to universities. And so there is an academic driver, not for all 6 of them, but there is a very strong academic driver. The second one is to recruit, train, focus on retain. Focus on retain, the whole issues of brain drain, whole issues of retain skilled workforce. To generate income and, more importantly, attract foreign investment. To shift from a service, to shift towards a service and knowledge economy. This is certainly driving United Arab Emirates, dependent upon oil, Qatar, dependent on gas, Botswana, dependent upon diamonds. So this is very strategic. And the last one is a reality: to increase competitiveness, to have geopolitical status. This cannot be denied, especially when you see countries that are purchasing the collaboration and cooperation of some of the more well-known institutions. So, in conclusion, I want to talk about a hub. As Gertrude Stein said, a rose is a rose is a rose. A hub is a hub is a hub is not true. You can just see how different these 6 hubs are. Now, I haven't talked about zones. I haven't talked about cities. I've only kept it at the country level. But I want to propose the student-oriented hub, the talented-oriented hub, and the knowledge innovation hub. All right, of those 6 countries, which ones do you think would be termed a knowledge innovation hub? Singapore. Which ones would you, anybody else? Just Singapore. Which ones would you think might be a talent hub? Ones that are really wanting to prepare a skilled workforce from their local students and a workforce, and also international. Qatar? Anybody else?
Anything in China?
Well, but China's not a hub.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's a very interesting question. Why isn't China a hub? These are all small countries. Yes? Botswana, exactly. And
arguably Malaysia, because they also want to see themselves as a hub that's preparing Islamic town.
Exactly. So I'm not going to spend a lot of I'm going to share with you what we discovered in terms of what we thought they were, what they said they were now, and what they aspired to, because these are evolving. But when it comes to hubs, I want to stress that the strategies can be different. Strategies can be similar. They are recruiting students. They are recruiting foreign faculty. They are looking at research centers. They are looking at knowledge industries. But the differences lie where? The differences lie in what is driving them to do it. Very similar to the work that you were doing, Hannah. The differences lie in what policy sectors were driving it. It's very different if industry is driving it, the Economic Board of Singapore, the Talent Board of Malaysia. Who are the key actors and what are the outcomes? Too early to really look at outcomes. So I won't go into the student hub very much. It's recruitment and education of students and the attraction of the foreign higher education providers. They're doing it for these reasons, and we'll get to policy sectors later. The Talent Hub. Yes, they are recruiting international students and local, but they are retaining them. It is a retention. Hong Kong is a really interesting example. They have just changed their whole immigration law for being able to retain more students in the country, especially from China. So the drivers are skilled labor, service and knowledge economy, competitiveness. We'll go through the sectors. The Knowledge and Innovation Hub, their focus is more on the production and knowledge of innovation. But of course, for that, they need to have skilled researchers excellent graduate students, and so also the recruitment of providers and R&D companies. So if we compare these three different types of hubs, who are the major policy actors for the student hub? Yes, it's higher education and trade and foreign affairs. But when we move to talent, what happens? Labor is number one. Immigration is more important. Higher education and industry. And when we move to the knowledge hub, it's the science and technology actors, it's industry, trade, and higher education. And so you can see some of the differences in rationales are certainly driving who are the major actors. So here we'll end with this slide, and this will look at the country. Qatar sees itself as a talent hub right now, but has aspirations to be a knowledge hub. And I would say that what their strategies, investments are now, they are on track for that. Very different than Saudi or other countries. UAE is very hard. People would say it's primarily a talent hub until you look at Abu Dhabi, where the Masdar Institute, the first free carbon city in the world, MIT is right in there. So they are talent primarily, given that 85% of the population in the United Arab Emirates is expatriate. The third one, Hong Kong, I honestly think that Hong Kong is still at the student level, that's not a very good word to use, is at the emphasis of being a student hub, and it's primarily at this point, I think, for economic reasons purely. Absolutely for economic reasons. I don't even think it's geopolitical. I think they want to become more talent-oriented, but their work to date shows that they are more student. Malaysia, interesting, they would be described as a student hub, and what they are wanting to do is to go from a student hub to a knowledge hub. One of the things I'm theorizing is whether, in fact, this is a linear development from student to talent to knowledge, or in fact, you do a leapfrog. That's a really interesting point. Let me continue. Singapore, acknowledged as a knowledge hub by everybody. When I worked with them and said, what is it that you want to go to next? They said, well, we're not sure, probably a networked hub. That they really don't want to, they want to really emphasize on all their research and networks with the rest of the world. So Botswana, student hub wanting to become talent. So with that, I will finish and not look into indicators and did you get all that? Good. And did you get the issues and challenges? Good. End up with the key messages. Key messages being this is a third generation that builds on first generation of people mobility, second generation of program and provider mobility. At this point, we're working with a model of 3 different types of hubs. This is a work in progress. There are definitely different rationales, policy sectors, and outcomes that characterize these hubs, and I'm very perplexed as to whether indicators would be feasible or useful. I've worked on it, and you know what I ended up asking myself? What are you trying to measure? You've got all this data, all this statistics, and in the end, what am I measuring? Potential, readiness, success, sustainability? I didn't know. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.